Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who hopefully took Atrus's warning seriously, or he'll live on Dunny forever.
Tim Longo.
Yes, I'm referencing the fourth ending to this game, which is the one I never saw until this playthrough. Someone on the stream commented that, are you going to go get all the endings? Like, haven't I gotten all the endings? And explained that there was another thing that you could do, which hadn't occurred to me. So we'll get there, I guess. But it is, it's in, there's a lot. There's a lot in this final bit to talk about, things that we haven't been talking about because we didn't want to reveal to each other things, or just because we hadn't played enough of the game to talk about them. Anyway, I think let's talk about the puzzle stuff first.
Yeah, we should.
Right. Yeah, before we get to like the story and lore, we'll kind of do that last, I think.
Yeah.
But you had mentioned in pre-show that as a first-person puzzle game, this was kind of a differentiator. We've talked about the graphics generally and how great it looked, but there's another aspect to that. You want to dive into that?
Which part do you mean? Do you mean as far as
it being a first-person puzzle game?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the immersion that brings, and the sort of like sense of Avatar, do you mean? Is that what the topic we were talking about?
Yeah. In pre-show.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the differentiators for me, and especially as we talked about in the first episode, based on the other sort of contemporary adventure games that are coming out at the same time via Sierra and LucasArts primarily, all very character driven and generally well written and focused on these sort of third person characters that you're controlling, et cetera, and things that are wrapped around. And so you're kind of taking on the guise of these characters. But in this case, it's very Avatar based, and in that as soon as you start the game, though there is the intro where it's a little bit cloudy on who exactly is talking, but I think it's the character talking. So it kind of breaks this a little bit. But from then on, everyone's referring to you in the first, in the first person, and you are, or in the whatever, I guess that would be
second person.
Yeah. And so you can inhabit the character yourself. And one thing we were talking about in the pre-show as a mini theory is that one of the aspects that could have contributed to this game feeling like a more accessible, broader audience game is the sense of immersion that you'd feel, and sense of not having to worry about who you are as a character. You're you. And in fact, at the end of the game, when you start talking to the father and stuff, he very much, treats you that way. And it'll come back around, I think, when we talk about the fourth ending, because of what he says to you. I think it's kind of a good example of this. And he very much treats you and addresses you that way. And so it helps with, obviously, the immersion, like I said. It helps with not needing to worry about the backstory of this character or where they came from or whatever. You're just playing you. And then it also helps sort of the visual storytelling of how to sort of deliver the clues to the player as well, because it's just, what are you looking at? What's in your sight? You navigate that way. And that's also a reason why I think why did we have that? We had a question recently where somebody asked what our favorite points of view are in camera. I believe. I don't know if that was last episode or the episode before, but
yeah, it was a couple episodes ago.
And my answer was first person, because of the immersion, but also just of the seeing the world through that perspective and it being very clear, right? Of course, still difficult to do. You can still mess it up, but yeah, that was the point that I was making there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, now that you're talking about it, I do think that casts back to earlier text adventure games, because I feel like
good point. Yeah,
Colossal Cave Adventure, or Zork for that matter, you're not necessarily playing a specific character. I think other Infocom games you more are, for example, the Enchanter series, which I think I referenced also last time. you're in a world of magic and you can cast spells, although I don't know if you're really a different person. I can't recall, because you basically are picking up scrolls in the world, and that's how you're casting the spells. So maybe you aren't. Maybe you still are yourself. And most of those games are kind of that way, even if they're set at particular times in history and things like that. For example, or in books for that matter. I mean, in the Hitchhiker's Guide, you're playing Arthur Dent, I believe, so you definitely have a character there. And one of the things about that, I think, is it's interesting because I think that also allows the stories to be more elaborate in a Sierra game or LucasArts game of the time, whereas here in MYST, they have to really take a light touch with the story, because they can't really know your character motivations, right? They can't ascribe anything to you. Whereas, of course, LucasArts can say, I want to be a pirate, and Sierra can be, I want to be king, or what have you, whatever his motivation is. Or I just want to get out of this janitor's closet, in the case of Roger Wilco. So, yeah, I mean, it both widens their view in a way and closes it a little bit at the same time.
Yeah, I think I think it's a good point about text adventures, or really any game that uses second person basically removes a certain I'm generalizing because it's not always the case, but generally removes a certain amount of layers of story that you don't think about kind of inherently, because they are talking to you in a second person perspective. So you just kind of go with it, you know what I mean? Versus like in a Guybrush situation, you not only will they lean into what and who Guybrush is, but they will there's additional information that helps you even solve puzzles sometimes, or know what's going on, or know where to go, or relationships or whatever. And here it's just kind of like thrusts you in, right? And so yes, they're able to be more elaborate, I think, with how the main character interacts with the story. But I think there's an opposite point there too, and I think MYST is kind of an interesting example, is because they've taken that layer out in this game, they've made the world and the characters in the world, the story and the backstory of that stuff, more elaborate. You know what I mean? Because it's like, and how intentional that was, who knows? Maybe that was just the limitations of what they were doing, but they clearly chose to go after a first-person puzzle game, which was fairly rare at the time, other than maybe text adventures. But it allowed them to kind of go kind of crazy on this backstory lore stuff with the books and the father and the son and the mother, and you know what I mean? And kind of like make a lot of richness into that you're sort of discovering, because if you are playing you, and of course, as the opening shows, you're kind of falling through this chasm, this rip in time or whatever. And so you're a fish out of water. You don't know what's going on. So you're acquiring all the information about the world at the same time as the player is, or the player and the character is the same, right? Because you don't know what's going on.
Right.
So there's a nice correlation there, where any question you have as a player would naturally work with what the character has. And then the way they talk to you, the characters talk to you, it's the same thing, right? Especially with the endings where the two sons and the father, the way they talk to you, right? And so you feel like really invested in that way, because it's the ye old, I've made the choices that I've made, and thus it's me here, succeeding or failing or what have you.
Yeah, and I mean, at the same time, too, because the characters are filmed, there's also a remove taken away there, because they are not abstract, cartoony characters or what have you that you might see in some of these other games we're talking about, from an art style standpoint. So you actually feel like, oh, I could just be me, because they're just them, right? Yeah. They're not abstracted in any, they're very specific. They are, well, they're the Miller brothers, as it turns out, but they are very specifically people that are filmed, and so I think that also happens in the Seventh Guest, as I recall. Even though the FMV in that game is of things that have happened in the past. I think you're seeing ghosts or something like that. I think the story is set up in much the same way, in which you're just at a haunted house, and not not some investigator or something like that. It's been a long time since I played that one, so don't hold me to it, but that's my vague recollection.
Yeah, I don't remember. I think
You've also kind of you're just yourself.
Yeah,
it's also first person.
Yeah. Just a big shift from Day of the Tentacle being the other puzzler from this time that we played, and just completely different diverging directions. For
Makes me really curious about Gabriel Knight at this point. Since it's the other big one I think from this year from Sierra. So
yeah, right, and I mean that was a a fairly long running series for them, the Gabriel Knight series, and then one of us mentioned Phantasmagoria, which I didn't think was a great game. My memory of it was not good. But
I think it was more a shock factor for that one.
Yeah.
Because they went really far.
Yeah, sort of silly, and it was Roberta Williams as well, I believe is the key designer for that, lead designer.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about that is they hybridized, FMV in and amongst a character-based game, you know what I mean? So they kind of tried to do both as things were, and I'm wondering, if how much MYST was starting to influence some of these other games as MYST just sort of broke out, right, and became a huge success, and I'm wondering if FMV kind of became a thing where like, oh, we got to start integrating that into our adventure games, and I believe the later Gabriel Knight games started doing the same thing because they ended up casting him as a real person, and so then you have this sort of weird like, okay, it's real and I'm playing this character that's in FMV, but it's not me, it's this actor, so I'm kind of playing a TV show.
Yeah. The other one I'm thinking of is Tex Murphy, I think, did that especially.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about, like, because I never would have made these connections back then. I didn't play any of these games kind of in a connected way. MYST and the Seventh Guest, yes, but the other ones I kind of played whenever I played them. I didn't play Day of the Tentacle the year it came out, and I'm not sure I ever finished it before. I'm certain I didn't finish it before we actually played it for the cast. I probably didn't get that far, to be honest, and I don't know why. Anyway, so yeah, I to this date have not played Phantasmagoria or Gabriel Knight Sins of the Father or Tex Murphy. I mean, there's a lot of adventure games that I drifted away from around that time. I still played the LucasArts ones because those were kind of the closest to my heart. So Full Throttle and The Dig, maybe
Grim Fandango
for sure, one of my favorite games. So I mean, thinking of the sort of first person stuff, it also points out the place where I got stuck because your view is limited to what you can see, which was in the Stoneship Age. And maybe we can talk about some of the puzzles there because the language there was a thing that you were frustrated by. But for me, the frustration was I literally could not see the little compartment door, half-height door or whatever that I was supposed to go through. Literally invisible to me. It looked the same as anything else. I don't know if that was true for you.
No, I did find it. There was maybe it was just because I was playing on the iPad, or who knows. There's like a little red spot on it or something that was a little bit glinting or something. So I think I caught it that way. But as you were talking about it last episode, that was my suspicion, is that you actually hadn't found the room yet, and so I didn't want to mention the compass or like any of that stuff because I didn't think you were stuck where I was stuck. And so, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to give you a clue that you should look in the hallway more closely or something, because that would give it away too much. So what did you end up doing? Like, how did you find the?
So, I mean, you mentioned that red dot. Like I said, invisible to me, not visible. And I'll tell you possibly why, because I was streaming it. I wasn't playing it full screen, and
oh man,
I'm wondering if at the specific aspect ratio I set it, which was windowed, right? I had it in a window on my TV. My setup in my workspace is like a monitor with a TV behind it on the wall, and I wonder if just not having it blown up if just like compressing it at whatever random window size I was at, like literally folded that away. Like that I just, for bilinear filter or whatever, that I literally just lost enough detail that I couldn't see it. Because looking at it, I had no idea. I was literally clicking randomly on those things because they sort of vaguely looked like doors. Like there was an arch and there was black. I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird. Well, they do have secret rooms sometimes, but not in every age. Like I was
So is that how you found it? You literally just accidentally, or you?
I literally accidentally opened hunting? It. Yep, literally accidentally, and there was no icon change like we talked about last time. There was nothing to indicate. This time when I clicked on a thing, it was going to open. I just like going up these staircases and clicking madly on these doors, and often that would turn me around, and I would or take me up and down the stairs, and I'm just like, what is like? There's got to be something here. It's the only place I really haven't thoroughly searched again and again. I mean, I spent probably an hour in the two rooms, the brothers' rooms prior to that, and I just lucked into it. So, okay. But it's amusing to me that there actually is a line there. And now I'm going to have to go back and like take it from the windowed size to full screen just to see if I can see it. Cause I have a save right around there. So it'll be easy to do. Yeah.
There's a little hint of, I believe I remember it being a little bit like a little red, like, it's not a light. I think it's just like red coloration on the door, on the trap door, or blue, or I think the door itself is a different color, at least on my version, from the wall. But it isn't lit well on purpose, right? So the definitely. Right. Oh, and then the other thing that I think is true is there's two, which you may have seen this. There's two hallways that lead to that compass room. And so
probably one from each brother.
Yeah, one from each hallway. So you definitely have two opportunities to see it, but I think the angle would still be the same coming into it. So yeah.
Well, that was interesting.
I mean, that's the kind of thing like we talked about last time. The camera framing and the lighting and that stuff is super critical, and I think one topic I didn't anticipate thinking about or talking about, that now that we're talking about it, is this is a game that has been ported over and over and over and over again, and on many different platforms that it was not intended to be on, and on the iOS version is interesting because it doesn't even go to full screen on the iPad. You can make it smaller so it fits probably on a phone. But when you blow it up, it doesn't, the aspect ratio is not a modern aspect ratio. It's probably 4:3 or whatever, right? So there's no way for them to extend it to a 16:9 at this point because of the frames were, rendered specifically. So it's just, I was like, why doesn't
it's the problem the wire has?
Weird. But in fact, the resolution, I think the one I'm playing is probably like the exact resolution that it was back then. And so to be honest, like it probably looks pretty bad if it gets any bigger. So, but I guess on PC though, it would be probably pretty full screen. So yeah, in my memory, it's funny, in my memory of playing it back in the day when it came out, I just remember it looking so good and just so sharp, and I'm looking at it now and it's like, ugh. So.
Yeah, I think I probably played it at like 1024 768 or even 800 600 at the time.
I wonder if they up-res then on the different resolutions. Is it pretty sharp for you then?
It's really not. It really wasn't. And I wonder though if that is partly the emulator maybe not dealing super well with it being in a window and changing it to random sizes and what have you. Yeah, I don't really know, and I don't normally run into issues like this. Of course, we often play games I can play on a console. So it's just, who knows? Really, who knows?
Yeah. But
yes, I mean, it's just funny to me that you say, well, there was a little red dot. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And I literally never saw that. And now I'm just like, wow, I wonder how much other stuff I just lucked into or randomly missed, or I mean, I felt like most of it I got through pretty well. So
how easily did you find the trapdoors in the Mechanical Age in their bedrooms or whatever those
so
rooms?
that one I also lucked into.
Yeah, because those are pretty well hidden too.
Yeah, it's like underneath this sort of tapestry or something like that. I clicked on that, I think expecting to turn me around, and it opened, and then I went, oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
And I think I would have probably found that one pretty quickly because it was kind of closer to the surface in that way. Like it immediately I was like, oh, that's right. Whereas this one, I don't remember finding that the first time. And the compass rose, I just don't remember that. Let's talk about the compass, because that was a thing that you had some frustration with.
Well, I had two different
ones.
Frustration. One, me just being bad at math and not knowing my compass math. You'd think I would be better at
Tim
that.
hikes a bit, and you would think he would know the directions on a compass.
Yeah. Well, one, I was probably thinking, and I think I mentioned this in the first or second episode, that I often I think too hard about solutions sometimes and kind of get ahead of myself of like trying to be too clever. And one I forgot to mention to you in pre-show, Brett, that I was my first red herring on this was I thought that the viewfinder, because if you look at the telescope up above, if you rotate it toward, now follow me on this because it's ridiculous. Okay. If you rotate it,
pointing at the ship,
the ship, it's at 180 degrees almost exactly. And the room that you need to light up is in the ship.
Yes.
And so that was my first thought, right? Is that you need to actually divert the light to the ship, because that's what I need to use, right? And so these are sort of related in that the primary point that I wanted to make last episode, but Brett hadn't played it yet, was quite often they either are very clear that there's an abstraction of a puzzle. And an example that I played this time would be the spaceship, right? Where you clearly see that the music to leave this in the spaceship is just an abstracted key, a code, a code to unlock. Or they're generally pretty good with showing you the cause and effect of something, i.e. also with the spaceship, the Selenic Age, is that what that one's called?
Mm-hmm.
That you see the electrical wire literally going from the power source, which is the puzzle there is also a power-based puzzle, and then you have to flick the switches to get it to the spaceship, so the cause and effect is there. In the compass's case, you are underwater, and in retrospect, when I played some of Real MYST, so I'll talk about that later, you could technically, maybe this was an iOS problem, I couldn't really see that there were lights out in the ocean, but you're in that compass room, you can see in the water that it's dark, but you don't see the ship, you don't see the lighthouse or whatever. And then if you're in the ship room that's too dark to leave, I guess apparently the lights are out there, you can see them in the dark if you could see them.
There's just one, but yeah.
And so the cause and effect there was sort of like why I didn't put two and two together that obviously I knew that you had to do something with the compass because that was the only thing really you could do at that point. You've done everything else. So I figured that was it. I did the wrong math, so I didn't find the right button to press. But there's no connection point to the why am I doing this thing to turn on these lights in the water that help me in this other place,
Yeah.
I guess it's probably implied that there's lights all over the water or something, so you're just turning them all on.
No. So I think that is there is, I agree that they don't sort of show you how this is all connected, but I do think that the book about the Stoneship Age gives you the clues, because the reason why you're pointing your telescope at the lighthouse is that the light is facing that way. Was the light lit when you pointed the telescope?
Yeah, I mean, it pulses, but I mean, what does that have to do with?
I mean, I think it's just a sort of logical clue. I agree. It's not as physically motivated in the world as other puzzles.
Like, but I think if it was implied that when by and maybe this is in the book and I missed it, or maybe it is implied that this is happening, but similar, because you do a lot of rotating of things, right? Like you rotate the tower, you rotate the fortress. If it was implied that you're rotating the lighthouse by using that compass, that would be a better version for me. You know what I mean? Of, oh, I see. I'm rotating that to this degree, or I don't know. That one falls apart a little bit too, but something like that. But anyway,
I think the book that's in the library indicates that there's this submerged lamp.
I remember that.
Yeah. And it also indicates that there is a light at the top of the lighthouse. Not the light that swivels, but a light literally at the top of the lighthouse.
Okay. I don't remember that part then.
Okay. So I think that those things are supposed to make this sort of logical connection. I agree. I'm totally not arguing that there is no physical visual connection between those things. And that I think does make it a little tough to swallow. But they do have he does have the diagrams of the things that he's building, and that seems to be the clue. Yeah. But it is a clue to a mystery that's not as well grounded as others.
Just a little bit of a stretch. And I think actually a better example than the spaceship stuff that I was talking about is, I think this is the case in almost every aspect of that age, is the Channelwood Age. I thought they did a wonderful job with the water, right? Because it's very physically motivated. Yeah. You have a visual language and clues for and you have the pretty much total manipulation of the water with the directional valves. And so, and you can literally, and then you mentioned last episode too, the audio is really good. So you know where the water's flowing, no matter where you're standing, if you're standing next to a pipe. And so, it's very much like, okay, I want to power that elevator. So I just need to get it over there. I want to go, I want to power that thing, or I want to, whatever. So, with the exception of that hidden switch, that was a little bit hard to find. That was just sort of like, they're just trying to hide something from you. But even that switch, they had a complete view of the thing, the gate you're opening. Yeah. So anyway, that was my point there about that. I wanted to talk last time, but you hadn't done it yet. But, yeah, and then I just did the wrong math on the on the degrees. So I was
135 degrees is southeast. Sorry.
Yeah.
Halfway between 90 and 180.
Yep, that's fair enough. I think that one I don't know. See, you walk me through how you added that up, in that you see in the telescope it says 135, and then
I actually worked back from the other way. Is that I found the compass room, which was the only thing I hadn't yet done on that in that age, and I went, oh, a compass. I know where else there's been degrees that I'm facing, and I went up to the telescope and I swiveled it around until I was facing the light, and I went, oh, there's a light and it's at 135 degrees. Oh, I must have to point the thing southeast. And that was it. That was the whole thought process.
Right.
So,
yeah. But
you could literally watch me fumbling through all of this. It was very quick once I found the compass. I was like, oh, I know exactly what to do. I don't know what angle it is. I've forgotten already because that was last week, but let me run up there and look again and figure out where it's facing. And it's got to be that. And sure enough. Yeah. But it is a little abstract.
Well, it's just the point is I don't. I mean, I saw the 135 and I knew that was the correct degrees, but the compass to me was seemingly in 10-degree increments. And so it would have been fallen in between two, but I just did the wrong math. And I didn't inherently know that southeast was 135 degrees, so. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. It's a weird angle too. It's like 11.25 or something like that. I'd have to actually go and work through the math. But that makes sense. Yeah. 11, that would be 44 plus 4 times 0.25 would be 1. So that'd be 45. Yeah. That's how it works out. It's 11 and a quarter.
No, it works. We looked at that image in pre-show. It definitely.
Yeah. No, I hadn't worked out what the actual,
Yeah.
increments were. I was like, it's around 11. What would that be? Oh, 11 and a quarter. That
I
makes
mean,
sense.
I clicked on most of the buttons around there. I just didn't click
Yeah.
on that
Well,
one.
it makes sense because it's 45, and then that's subdivided again in half. That's 22 and a half. And then it's subdivided again. That's 11 and a quarter. That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it makes sense. I just, I just was lame. So, yeah. So, but I guess that was, so what about, okay. So you finished that one. And I finished the, Selenic Age.
Selenic Age. Yeah.
Um, and so let's see, is there anything in there
Did you have any trouble at all with the, I mean, because that was a great revelation for me when I realized I was literally mapping out on paper where I had been in the railway tunnels.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you just do it by audio and you realized early?
No, it was a mess. And I'll admit, I did remember actually, from the time I played many years ago, that the sounds meant something, but I wasn't willing to figure that out. And I don't remember, like, I don't know how, other than trial and error, I don't know if they tell you what each sound means, but I looked it up. I'll be fully honest. I was like,
they do tell you which sounds are which.
When do they tell you that though?
Well, as you're doing it. So if you arrive at a place and there's no sound, then you have failed. But the first few.
But how do you know chirp west?
So the first few that you do, are forced. There's only one direction you can go.
I see. So they're teaching you,
and I think they're northeast, northwest, or something like that. So you actually get 3 of the sounds in the first 3 or 4 moves, and they're forced. They're the only directions you can go that aren't back. So you learn a lot very quickly, and then and at that point they've only taken you in canonical directions. It's actually really clever, because then eventually you get to a place where you end up going south, and that gets you the 4th piece, and then they start mixing them and adding south and east, or north and west, or what have you. I mean, I don't remember the specifics. I actually wrote it down and would just kind of, going through it once, because I went back. I didn't get any pages the first time through it, and then I went back and was like, oh, let me get a page. Let me give me the other page. So I visited that age 4 times to get the pages.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of like, well, the second time through, I just wrote down what the directions were. So I didn't have to.
I see.
Listen.
Yeah. So if so your revelation was that the audio meant something,
right?
And then
but it was only after I had done a ton of mapping and backtracking of like just going in a direction. Like I didn't even connect that there was a sound or not a sound. And then at a certain point I went, wait a minute.
That's different. There's
no sound. Or I started over and I was like, wait a minute, there's a sound. There wasn't a sound last time. And it just, and that was a couple weeks ago. And it was really fun on the stream. I actually needed a lot of help with the sounds, because especially when they mix, I had a really hard time of like hearing it and being like, that is this plus that.
Yeah. It's a little finicky.
I mean, they were limited by the Mac sound stuff, I think, at the time. But yeah, shout out to Ryan, who helped me with that. He's an audiophile, and he's always he actually sent us that was it called Yacht Rock song. Been a while, haven't seen you in a while, or whatever that was.
Oh yeah.
The singing review. So
right.
Shout outs to Bio from the stream.
Yeah, I mean,
let me get through there. I solved the puzzle. I worked out the puzzle, but then I needed help with actually hearing what I was hearing. So.
Right. Yeah, I think because when I forgot about that section, and I got there and I was like, oh no, I remember this.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think that there's some chirping that happens that gives me clues. And so, but I did what I typically do is I just start experimenting, and then I just started going just to kind of fool around to see what was going on. I didn't map out or anything. And then I got to a dead end where there was no sound, and I was like, ugh, all right, I'm just going to. So this was like one of the 3 things I looked up, or 4 things I looked up in the whole game.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I know that there's an answer. I know that these chirps mean something, but I'm not. And the thing is I would have started over, I think, at that point. But I didn't have a save coming into it. So I would have had to have like
redone a whole age or whatever.
Yeah, I would have had to I would have done redone a lot of stuff to get back to the beginning of it and do it the way they intended me to do it. And so I was just like, oh, I'm not going to bother. So yeah, I think I looked up 3 times when I got stuck. Yeah. But
I will say that the puzzle on MYST, the island of MYST itself, where you have to play the sounds back to match.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I will say that in 1994 or whatever, when I played this on my Gateway, I didn't love it. And the reason was my audio card just didn't play the sounds that were attached to those sliders.
Oh, really?
There was there was nothing. Like I dragged them up and down, nothing happened.
Compatibility issue.
And so I basically worked out the spacing that they had to be at in order to match up.
What do you mean the spacing? What?
Well, it's mapped to a keyboard, and there's a certain number of slider positions.
So the tones
I couldn't hear the tones, but I mapped the tones to where their slider positions hopefully were.
Yeah. And
had some trial and error, and some of it was basically like, okay, well, if I have this tone right, the next one's 12 tones up because it's an octave or whatever, and then there's another 4 for the next one, etc. So there's some stuff like that where it's just like once I could get one, figure out one, I could figure out the others, but I couldn't hear it, and I was like, this is really hard. I don't know how they expect people to do this.
That's funny. It's one of my most, favorite, I guess, but most memorable, like, lock and key code type puzzles of all time, really, because it just was so different,
Yeah.
For you, definitely a pain in the butt. So I apologize. Yeah. That's too bad. But kind of revelatory at the time of like, wait a second, I have to actually, listen. It's an audio base. Like I need to actually find the right exact, note. I thought it was really cool. Yeah. And so that was a delight to play again in that one particular one. So
yeah.
How funny. But yeah, that, and then let's see, in the rest of this, once you're there, that's right. It's also audio based where you have to,
you have to go find the matching soundscapes basically,
right.
Which all worked for me at that time. It's just that one thing. I wonder if the directional stuff didn't work, because I don't remember that super clearly either. And I may have at that point been so frustrated. I can remember when I realized that I was supposed to be hearing something, and I might have looked up something in that whole section back in the day, that I was so frustrated I might have just like burned through that whole age with a walkthrough. I honestly can't remember. Yeah. But I can imagine, I can believe it, that I was like, what? I'm supposed to hear tones? And just was like, screw this.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a walkthrough and get to the end of the game or whatever, because that was the one I did last.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think I probably eventually got the strategy guide or something back in the day. I do, maybe before we're totally done with this series, I still need to go to the storage unit and see if I can find my notebook. I think I still have it, where, very easy on iOS just to take screenshots of stuff, but I know I kind of took, drew everything out from the books and stuff, and it was the notebook that they give you in the box, right? So it's like, it looks like a MYST book. It was super cool. And I spent a lot of time just like really intricately drawing all the diagrams and the pictures, and I remember having a lot of fun with that. So I hope I still have it. That would be.
I never had one of those because mine was an OEM copy and it just came with a bunch of other discs. So,
yeah, right.
Which was the thing they did. Oh, here's a bunch of things in sleeves. Put it in your new computer. Let's talk about the story and lore as the kind of last thing to talk about. Now that we've played the whole game, we can kind of talk about the themes and all of that stuff that you were kind of chomping at the bit last time to talk about.
Well, the first thing I'll start with is that I don't remember, like I think I mentioned last episode, I don't remember really spending a lot of time trying to digest the narrative in the books. the first time, but one of the fun things about this time is when I knew I was going to go into the next one, even though you can kind of early on, right, go to the library and kind of read all of them, I would make sure that I would go back. Obviously, I'm sure you did the same thing, and most people do this. So, and I'll reread the book for the one that I'm about to go in, and the way that they're written, they do a great job at setting up sort of the context and foreshadowing of what's in that world. So you have a certain amount of expectations and sort of setting of what you might find there, and so it was really interesting to kind of uncover all of that stuff. And then one thing that they did very, very good job of, for the most part, in each of the ages, is they would back up that context with minimal amount of visual storytelling or set dressing or something like that. So, for example, in Channelwood, you read that book, it talks about the monkey people, it talks about bringing the sons there, it talks about building the walkways and building things up. There's this whole thing about how they worship humans or something like that. And there was another older human there before you got there. And then I think he dies and then kind of transfers it over to the father. And so there's this sort of whole history that goes on there. But what they set up from a thematic perspective for all of the ages is that there was a lot of activity. Well, all except I think one of them, the Selenic Age. There wasn't. There was, I think, an abandoned age, but there was activity and events and things happening, even with other characters that you don't get to meet. And then when you go there, they're all sort of like dead or dying, or it's many years into the future, and so you have this sense of this ancient, time has passed. Basically, these ancient areas, but you still get a sense, like in Channelwood, in the huts and stuff, you see, some signs of civilization. So you can kind of imagine that the monkey people live there or what have you. I think they just call them monkey people. I forget exactly what they refer to them, how they refer to them.
I think that's right. Yeah.
And then of course the repeated theme of the sons inhabiting each of these ages and going with their father. And so you have that pattern, like we talked about, I think, last episode or what have you, where you expect to find each of the sons having, some sort of, except for the Selenic Age, a room or something that represents them because they spent time there. And in fact, in the book, in the Selenic Age, he talks about how he left the sons in Channelwood while he was in this age. And so there was this sense of sort of connectedness between the timeline. And so one of the questions I asked myself early on was, I'm wondering if you could piece together, which I'm sure this answer is out there someplace, the sort of chronological order of all of this, because I believe they were young kids in the mechanical age. And then, like I said, while he was in the Selenic Age, they were in the Channelwood Age and they were getting older. And then I don't know. Yeah, I don't remember what the specifics were for the kids in the Stoneship Age. But another example from a lore perspective that I love in the mechanical age is they describe. He describes how the people in the mechanical age were being attacked by these enemies, the pirates. Yeah. And so when you go there, the fortress that you're actually manipulating and to get the answer, you already have context for what that fortress is and why it's there, right? And why they built it. And that he helped them by building it to help protect them from these enemies, And so that's sort of like the macro point that I wanted to talk about, because they, very much like, I don't know, the sort of ye old Indiana Jones abstract puzzles where the ancients, quote unquote, were trying to protect their, artifacts from trespassers or something. And they did a little bit of that here, but for the most part, whenever you go to each of these areas, even though the level, each of the age is sort of like the puzzle is the level, the context for what you're doing there and why you're doing the things you're doing has some history to it before you even get there. And so you're filling in the blanks a lot. Obviously, writing is a big theme. In fact, I think he calls it, capital the art. and I believe he's referring to writing at that point and the power that writing in these books and linking these books to these ages has. And it's sort of like how he goes from place to place. Obviously, the journals are a big theme. And so, and it just kind of brings these things to life, just like reading a book where you're filling in the blanks in your imagination, right? And it'll come back around in my takeaways.
I actually just enter them. How do you read, Tim?
You just go into the books.
I enter the books.
Right.
No, I think that's well said. I think that's kind of, in a way, that's kind of what that's about, is what it's like to be a reader. As a person who, my whole life, if I'm reading a book and you say my name, I won't hear you. I literally, if I'm in it, the rest of the world just falls away from me. Yeah. And when I say that I'm in a book, I say that somewhat tongue in cheek to reference the game, but it is that for me. That's the experience of reading for me, more than any other medium, even games. I mean, that I love games, but for me, reading is the thing that completely takes me out of myself.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of that has to do with when I started reading and what a thing it was for me when I was very, very young. But yeah, I love having that theme. This book, this game speaks to me on that level.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and to be honest, until playing it for the podcast, I don't remember thinking about those themes at all back when I played it before. I just felt like I was playing this high res puzzle game, on this cool island. I didn't think about it that deeply, because I just didn't care, I guess, or whatever. I didn't spend the time. And like I think I said last episode or one of the episodes, for the journals, I generally kind of breezed through them just for looking for clues, not really trying to digest what he was talking about. And so it was actually really fun to spend the time digging into that. And I guess it's kind of a funny, interesting theme to have in a game, to be honest, right? Where the whole point of the game, in a lot of ways, especially this game in this era, was to show this high fidelity experience of full immersion, and you're manipulating the environment, you're rotating in huge towers, there's all these cool interactable moments. But in between those moments, there's filling in the blanks the way you do when you read, and I don't know, it's kind of an unexpected, that's not a common theme for video games, which is sort of focused on delivering you to a world, right? And having you play as these characters and interact and manipulate things in these worlds versus, and again, I'll come back to this point in my takeaways, but
yeah, I that makes me think about the earlier games because they were more focused on children earlier.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder if this is a through line in their work in any way, that they are trying to, as stewards of the minds of young people playing their games, to steer them at things that they also think are important, which is not just video games, but maybe also those books that your teachers make you read. Because isn't the manhole sort of an Alice in Wonderland sort of story?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so it makes me think that maybe this is just one of their hang-ups, and maybe part of what they feel is their responsibility as designers for children's games prior to this one.
Yeah. Well, and the name of MYST, right? We found out in doing the minimal amount of research we do.
Mysterious Island.
Yeah, it was named after.
You know what the Mysterious Island is?
I have not read that one though. No. So what is that?
It's the island where Captain Nemo's base is in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Oh, I did not know that. Interesting.
Ties together 3 Jules Verne novels.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah. So it's sort of a home base.
It's where there's a part in the book like 3/4 of the way through, and it's in the movie too, I think, where they go there. In this book, Captain Nemo, you don't know it's Nemo for most of the book. I went and researched this more. I was like, really? Based on Mysterious Island? What a weird thing. That's not one that anybody ever reads, because people read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And it turns out that Captain Nemo is a character throughout the book, but he's older, and he actually dies towards the end of the book of old age. Spoilers for 19th century fiction.
Darn it.
Sorry. Yeah, but you learn all about who Nemo actually is, like what his actual history is in this book. It feels like fan service, Mysterious Island, when I read about it.
That's funny. Well, I mean, obviously there's definitely correlations with this then, right? Because this was the MYST Island was sort of their home base, right? That he would continue back to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of correlations that make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and then I think
let's. Oh,
well,
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, the last thing. I don't know if you want to talk about the endings at all to wrap up the story.
Okay, yeah, no, we should, and then we'll take a break.
We can move on to takeaways, but I mean, so there's the theming that I didn't really super overanalyze, that I'm kind of just taking on face value. I don't know, maybe you have some insights that I didn't take away from it. Is really just the way that the sons and the brothers come into it. I wanted to figure out more going on there as far as like, why did maybe I missed it in the journals and he kind of refers to it, but there's sort of a disappointment I currently have, unless I just missed something, is that it's a bit of a throwaway that these two sons betrayed him and became greedy, as he says. And I guess I wish there was more going on there with why and what themes are happening there. And is it just a matter of them becoming spoiled with the sort of availability and power to these, these grand adventures that he takes them on, or what have you? So it just felt a little just kind of on the nose, Cain and Abel kind of stuff or something. But ultimately,
I think there's maybe also a story of absent fatherhood there. He's withdrawn. He's off doing other things in other ages and leaving these kids behind with strangers.
Yeah.
And I think that there's maybe something of that in it. Literally with sort of somewhat animals with the monkey people. And then it's just, go ahead.
And the mothers apparently captured someplace.
Yeah.
But then I think that my disappointment comes with some sort of thematic lesson or something, that when you get back to the library after the sort of quote unquote good ending, the place where the books were, where the kids were trapped, there's little explosion, little scorch
destroyed
marks.
The books. Yeah.
He destroyed the books. So it's like, how far do you have to go as the father to do that? It was pretty harsh.
Yeah.
I wrote down the note, harsh, dude. It's like, so I was struggling to find any kind of like what was going on there. Maybe they reveal that more in the other books, or in the other games, because there's so many. There's 5, right? I was looking on Steam. How many?
There are 5, and I think that the first 3 were definitely done by the by Cyan.
Yeah.
I don't know. The parentage, or the lineage rather, gets a little more confusing to me after that, or just like didn't have time to do the research into later games. But it's I mean, there's also just a big logical hole in this, in that the sons have been imprisoned in a book, and so has the father.
Right.
So who tore out which pages? Like,
right.
Who tore out the page that imprisoned the dad? Because presumably he tore out the 4 pages that you've gone and found, or 5 pages, I guess, hither and yon, throughout the ages. That just, like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And then who left that page behind in the box?
Maybe they covered, didn't. Yeah, you're right. That is a pretty good logical hole to find. I feel like maybe he mentioned it, because he could pull out the page, put it in that marker, and then enter the book without the page.
Oh, right.
But why would he do
that? Yeah.
From...
Oh, maybe they did that. Maybe they tore out a page. He didn't notice.
I think he did talk about that. Yeah, I think you're right. I think they tore out a page and then hid it from him, and he didn't know.
But he's the one that looks the clues to where it is.
Well,
oh no, maybe he doesn't, because maybe that's them writing that thing that they split in half.
Yeah, that could have been. We assumed it's him, but it may not have been.
Yeah, okay. I could see that being the case.
Which that makes sense because of the fourth ending that neither of us knew about, right? Because you can enter the book without.
You can enter the book without the page.
And he just the thing is,
and he just is like, what kind of idiot?
Yeah. He's like, well, I guess we're gonna live together for eternity, and
then he gives you this look, and he's just like, ugh. I can't even with this guy.
It's so.
And
funny.
Then he just looks down to his page and just occasionally just makes this face like, ugh, really?
And then I just kind of walked around in the room for a little while. I was like, huh, yeah, I guess I'm just here.
Just here.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, and then of course you have the two endings, one for each brother as well, and you get quite cool. Man, the way they use those postage stamp size videos. Because of their capabilities is just brilliant. You mentioned the elevator usage as another example, which I think is another brilliant point. But in that case, once you give the final page to either of the brothers, the screen boils down to just one of those small videos in the middle of the screen. You're like, oh, why is it just so small? And you're like, oh my goodness, I'm inside the book. Seeing it from that vantage point, and it's just an amazing moment. And then they start ripping the pages out, so basically you have 3 failure endings and 1 success ending. So
yeah, and I love how they're also degrading the video as time goes on, so you're getting less and less of them talking. Brilliant. In the same way as when you saw them in the book, as you gave them more and more pages, you saw more of them. So it's very clever. So very, very clever. Nice, sort of mirroring of that experience. And yeah, you're right. That's a fantastic way that a bad ending can happen. And I would hope that most people got to see multiple endings, right? It's not something I normally care about, but in this case, it feels like you have to really see those.
Well, luckily it's easy enough to do them too.
Right. Yeah.
But I definitely didn't know about the one. It didn't dawn on me to go into the book, even though they warn you, the brothers warn you not to go into the book without the page or something. He says, like, don't, even though
they're like, just leave the green book alone. Yeah.
Yeah. They're like, don't, my father will try to trick you. I think they say, like, don't enter the green book, or you'll never get out, or you'll be trapped or something. I did the red one first. Or actually, no, it was, so I only did all of the red pages. I didn't do any of the blue pages, just for context. So the second to last video, you get from, he tells you that. But anyway.
Oh, right. Because they give you more and more kind of information as you go. All right. Let's take a quick break, come back, do our takeaways and some feedback.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. As we normally do at the end of a little series, MYST is just a 3-episode series for us, although we've got some bonus content on the way. We'd like to finish off with our sort of takeaways for the series. And I have a feeling that in this case, our takeaways are all going to be pretty much the same, but we will see how that goes. Why don't you go ahead and give us your first one, sir?
Yeah, my first one I was sort of alluding to in the lore section, and I'm titling it just implied context, which I think I already mentioned, and I guess it sort of wraps into what we were also just talking about, of the themes of entering a book and writing and just sort of like filling in the blanks. But I just loved that. And it actually is a partner to my second one, which I won't say yet, but I love the fact that even though this was sort of one of the most immersive feeling types of games of its time, especially in the puzzle context, there was still so much that they added to the world by implying what else had been going on, with giving it this rich sort of backstory and setting, and even the visual storytelling of a lot of the puzzles and the way that the island work and the ages work. And so it really kind of glued it all together for me, and allowed you as the reader and the player and the viewer to to put all the pieces together. So it's interesting because we were just talking about sort of the book centric and writing centric theme. I wonder if that was another element of why it had such a broad appeal, as well, because it had just enough tangibility to it, but also just enough for players to fill in on their own as well, to make it a richer game, a little bit like text adventures in a way, right? Where text adventures, text
adventures are games you play in your head.
Yeah, exactly. And they're amazing in your head, because of
best graphics I've ever seen.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Exactly. So text adventures are sort of the perfect Venn diagram for Brett DeVille. So yeah.
Or Duville even.
Or Duville. I prefer DeVille, as we have identified.
As does Cadillac, apparently. So I guess my first takeaway would be accessibility, which is something we talk about a lot these days. And it's funny to look back at a game that's more than 25 years old and be like, actually, that game's super accessible. It's literally just click. And it's but the accessibility, I think, goes beyond that. We've talked a lot about sort of the simplicity of learning to play this. I mean, this is an adventure game that anybody could play to a certain extent, except for apparently people who had audio compatibility issues. But no, I mean, it's the icon tells you if the click there is going to turn you or move you forward. Sure, I've had some quibbles about that, but for the most part, this is a game that is very parsable even by a non-player, and I think that that's a huge contributor to its success at the time. We've talked about the other elements as well, but for me, the thing that I come back to is just there's not a lot that has to be explained to you as far as how to work the world. Mm-hmm. And that is a huge thing. I've been working on a blog post for a while now about just how much crap they throw at you in a JRPG in the first 10 minutes and how overwhelming it can be. I played Chain of Memories, the Kingdom Hearts, was it a DS title. And there was literally an important part of that game that they showed me in the tutorial and I completely forgot about for the entirety of the game, which would have made it a lot easier to play. But they had already thrown all these other mechanics at me and it was just more than I could bear. Mm-hmm. Here they have this sort of mystery that they tease you with. They then let the interface kind of fade away. And it's just literally click on things if you're interested. And that's really nice in comparison. And in comparison to a lot of games, I mean, the LucasArts games typically I had 6 to 9 verbs or something like that. They had sort of a bar that was like 3x3 or 2x3, depending on the game, I think. Mm-hmm. And sometimes different things would light up or not light up, and the inventory can interact with one another. And like, there's a lot of complexity there. And it was certainly text adventures had their own kind of problems in that regard, where it was literally whatever words you could think to type in, which is kind of a lot of functionality. So, I mean, obviously they don't support all of them, but knowing which thing to do had kind of made text adventures more and more inaccessible. And out comes this game that has literally click on the screen where you see things that are interesting to you. Click to move forward, click to move backward, click to turn. It's all one thing. And that simplicity of interface, I think, gave it a real leg up.
It's interesting. You mentioned, we were talking about the sort of legacy for them when it comes to their previous games and how they were thinking and designing things. But it never occurred to me that because I played Manhole back in the day as well. And because they were coming from a kids oriented, edutainment kind of perspective or what have you, they of course were going to default to a more accessible game in that regard for that, for that case, and for that audience. And so it never occurred to me that that is probably the real one of the reasons that MYST is the way it is their previous audience was an audience that needed, accessibility to be prioritized.
Yeah.
And
well, and of course on the Mac you only had one mouse button besides.
Oh yeah, good point. Yep, that's another reason too. But yeah, both of those. It's just funny, how necessity being the mother of invention, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Constraints and creativity, man.
Yeah, and then just this blowing up to be the case for anybody, like you said, anybody who wants to play it can play it because of that ease of use. Yeah. It's a good one. Very interesting, kind of a masterclass in that regard of thinking that way. And I think to your point about the number of verbs that LucasArts ended up adding and working with over time, my memory of that is they sort of eventually got themselves a little bit into trouble, right? Because they just kept adding some of that complexity. And then I remember, Full Throttle, Grim Fandango, some of the later ones.
3, basically.
Yeah. They kind of, realized over time that they'd gone too far and started to make things more accessible after that. And MYST could have been one of the influencers there, to be honest.
Yeah, good point.
My second one, and accessibility was definitely related to my third. So the second one that I want to kind of focus on, and that'll probably be it for me, is I titled Leaning into Strengths. That I think another version of masterclass for me for this game is they had found certain tools in the way that they were making this game, which I think we talked a little bit about in the first episode when it comes to macromedia, when it comes to how they were rendering stuff, HyperCard, and they knew they could use these videos, which we talked about just a moments ago. And Brett had pointed out that it never occurred to me. Brett had pointed out in the first episode how, and this is, I think, a point I forgot to mention last episode that I had in my topics, but then we didn't get to. There was a point of frustration for me getting back to this game, a little minor one, where I was like, why do I have to close this door before I have to go up the elevator or down an elevator or whatever? It's like, it shouldn't be a thing, and they could have done it automatically, but the fact that I closed the door and then the windows to the elevators are the same size as the videos that they usually are playing, and then they can play that video that you mentioned. I didn't put two and two together on the reasoning behind that originally, and then they can play the video to give the illusion that the elevator is moving, and so they knew what they had, and then they used it in. And another good example is the underground maze thing that we were just talking about, right?
Where you're looking through the viewfinder or whatever,
of the submarine thing,
front porthole.
It's just the right size, right? And you don't even think about it. It's like, that's just the porthole, it's just what it should be. But they just designed around their constraints so perfectly, and it just all fits together really well, and so all of the different things that they had at their disposal, they used in very economical and smart ways, and they leaned into them. And then the other side of it is they knew they weren't going to, other than the videos, they weren't going to have like animated characters. They weren't going to have, crazy Ɂelaborate things happening in the worlds. And so in the journals, they wrote in reasons for all of that stuff, right? Where races had died out, or the weather had changed, or the water rose, right? So it's like, I feel like that happens almost in every age. For some reason, the water rose.
Cataclysm. Yeah,
it's then you get there and you're like, I can't go out there because it's water everywhere. So convenient, but then they write it into the story in the journals, so you kind of convince yourself of that, which wraps around to my first takeaway. So anyway, leaning into strengths.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like that's also a strength that Gone Home leaned into, as far as, and then of course they try to extend it with Tacoma with a slightly bigger team. It's like, well, we've got 3 people making this game. Ultimately, a couple more, maybe, contracting or joining the team later. But what can we do with a first-person adventure game set in a real location? well, we can't do characters. You can't interact with anybody. We can't make that. It's enough just to make a place and make it all make sense and all the art that's going to fit in it. So you limit yourself down based on what you have. And with two principal creators for this game, it's the same sorts of limitations, right? Yeah. All right. Well, I wanted to at least remark about something we talked about a lot in the first episode, which is just being in the right place at the right time. And that's a hard thing to plan for. So it's not a takeaway that I can necessarily apply moving forward, but it's just one of those things that happens in games where you just happen into it. You just happen to be there when lots of people are trying to buy PCs and they have these newfangled CD-ROMs in them. And just being the game that's there for that, or one of our 2 or 3 games that's there for that. And that was just a stroke of luck. I don't know to what degree they were able to even plan or think about that, but it just doesn't feel like a thing that they could. So that's a huge deal. I mean, that just for them, that was an immense part of their success. So yeah, it's a big deal. And sort of part of that is that technology does still matter. And that's kind of a sort of a side point, is like the CD-ROM technology that this was enabled by really mattered, and having a showcase for it was really important to them. So there is sort of a more positive takeaway, is that, yeah, sure, sometimes you can lean into a technology that is the coming thing, and that turns out to be a really good decision. I sort of think back to when I played my first HD era game on the 360, which was the first Assassin's Creed. And I wrote a blog post about it. Like, okay, sometimes graphics do matter. As a person who, as we've already talked about on this episode, grew up playing text adventure games, and man, the graphics were amazing. I still, when I put that game in for the first time, was just kind of blown away at like, oh, this is what games are going to look like now. And what a big difference that was. And I think that MYST benefited from that as well. So that's kind of a more positive way to say being at the right place at the right time, but investing in, this is the new normal, is this level of fidelity, can sometimes really reap a big reward as well. So kind of a couple of related points I'm throwing together there, but they mostly revolve around the tech.
Yeah, no, they're good. Yep, fascinating game.
I am so glad we played it, because this is not a game I would have revisited if we weren't doing a podcast together. And that's been kind of a theme. There's been a lot of games we've played where I'm like, oh yeah, that's a great game, I'd totally play that again. And then there have been games where I'm like, that's kind of an important game that I never really played much, or I played a long time ago and I haven't thought about recently. And revisiting it now with 20-ish years of game development under my belt and kind of all that hindsight, and being able to connect the dots on what this leads to, it's just really interesting. And I'm like seriously thinking about playing Riven. Is that where I am right now? Like, I don't have enough to play.
Yeah. Well, there's more where that came from.
Yeah, there's plenty more where that came. What about that Lighthouse game? Maybe I'll play that too. I'm gonna be down this rabbit hole for a while. Maybe it's a
pun intended, I assume.
Yeah, manhole, rabbit hole.
Yeah, good work.
Bit of a theme these days is, we played this game on the podcast, and now I've got an awful lot of other games I'm going to play.
Yeah.
So, anyway, well, let's. Before we turn to feedback, you were gonna let me go without saying it. I'm gonna have my Brett's Book Minute. Here we are at the end of a series.
There we go.
There were a
Jules
couple
Verne.
games. Yeah, really, Mysterious Island. You can get it on Gutenberg.org. No, I was gonna turn to kind of an unusual book to pair with this. I had a couple in mind. There's another one I might save for another date. But no, I'm gonna pick actually my favorite book from last year that I read, which was which was called The Imposter, by a Spanish writer by the name of Javier Cercas, or Cercas, maybe. It has a lot of similar themes to MYST, having to do with literature and acts of creation, and the artist's role in that. And there's a sort of amount of responsibility that's going on there. And of course, it wouldn't be sort of related to MYST if you didn't have at least one person who's not what they seem. I mean, you can get from the title, The Imposter. It involves somebody who is not what they seem, but it maybe involves more than one person who's not what they seem. And it's a book I absolutely loved. It won some awards. It's a great book. You don't need me to tell you that, but you may not have heard of it otherwise. It's one that might have passed me by if not for a friend of mine saying, "Oh, hey, this book is coming out this week and all the reviews are great. We should read it and discuss it." So, yeah, really interesting book. Nice. A lot of meta stuff going on. I had another book which was more of like a puzzle book, but I was like, no, actually, this with the themes, I think that this book is the right fit. So that's my book minute for MYST.
Love it.
So I know you won't read it, but maybe somebody out there will. And if you do, if we ever meet in person, we should talk about it because I love that book. Okay.
All right. Well, your favorite book of last year, that's high praise when you read over 300 books. So
it wasn't over 300. It was 279.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, you got close.
I did.
But still, nobody reads. That's still a lot of books in a year.
It's a lot. Well, I wasn't playing as many games. Anyway, shall we move to feedback?
Yes, let's do that.
Okay, so the usual thing I like to say is, of course, we'd love to have your reviews via the sort of various podcast infrastructures out there. I am personally subscribed to all the iOS reviews, so if you make those, I will see them. If not, point me at whatever you reviewed us on. I will happily read them on the air. Or should you write a singing review, I will sing it. You'll just have to tell me what song it is.
Oh, boy.
And, of course, we have our feedback sent to devgameclub@gmail.com, where you, sir, have the first one.
All right. Subject is MYST iOS controls from Raymond. Hi. I can't remember which mobile game I'm referencing, but it was either like MYST or a dungeon crawler. Their solve was to give you the option to drag your finger around the screen, and an icon would indicate the movement you would perform after letting go of the screen. You could also drag your finger to a zone at the bottom of the screen to cancel the hold. Regards, Raymond. P.S. Either the game existed or my brain came up with the solve, but I can picture the interface quite vividly, so I think it's real. Thank you, Raymond. I don't... Well,
you don't think it's MYST.
I don't think it's MYST unless I missed that. Hardy har har. But I have seen that interface before.
I have too, and I don't know where.
Yeah. It's something that plenty games have always struggled with in that regard on the iOS because of that same problem. But now I'm wondering if maybe that is on MYST. I'll have to look. If it is, they didn't give me any tooltips about it. So, yeah, the real MYST, they give you a little bit more tutorialization. So, because it's on iOS, it's hard to move around in a first-person game.
Oh, is it like virtual sticks or something like that?
No, it's actually you put your finger on the screen, and when you move around, you basically move your finger around, you're moving your head around. Oh, and then if you press on the middle of the screen, you will move forward, and then you kind of move your finger once you've started moving forward, so you can kind of direct yourself that way, if that makes sense. So it's a little finicky, but it works okay because it's not an action game. You're just kind of wandering around. As an aside, Real MYST is very interesting to play because of the full real-time 3D world and camera.
These sort of navigation issues that are existing on the phone in this case sort of remind me of VR issues as well with moving through 3D spaces. Mm-hmm. because of course you're not physically moving, and the controllers are a little more limited, I guess. Like I don't play VR games because I'm very motion sensitive, as far as being motion sick. But that's my understanding, is that there's been a lot of experimentation with, well, how do we move in this space in a way that makes sense to the player? So
Yeah.
it made me think of that as well. It's like a modern analog of interface problems.
Yep.
Another one anyway.
Whole nother frontier. Yeah.
Yeah, between touch and VR.
Yeah, that would improve MYST if that is not in the game. It would help this a little bit. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that interface. Okay. Thank you, Raymond. This is from Walker Farrell. The subject is just MYST. He says, "Hi, Brett and Tim." Okay, yeah, there's a couple paragraphs here, but there's a question down here. I've been listening to Dev Game Club for about a year, starting with your playthrough of my favorite game of all time, Super Mario World, and zigzagging my way through the archives from there. I have been fascinated by your analyses for any number of reasons. Not only do they enrich my own experience playing classic and modern video games, but I have noticed quite a few parallels between game design and my own work developing unusual electronic musical instruments for a modular synthesizer company. For example, in games you discuss things like the number of verbs that are made available to the player. In synthesizer design, we work hard to optimize the number and type of controls a module should have. A balancing act, as we want to be sure to give musicians flexibility and access to their creativity, and on the other hand, not to overwhelm with options or include too many options that don't have dramatic uses. Our instruments are not only made with an ear to creating interesting sounds, but are also made to be unique compositional and improvisational interfaces, so that the type of music made by them is informed by design choices. In many ways, playing a modular synthesizer, more so than with other instruments, is like solving a puzzle or playing a game. Perhaps without as obvious an end goal in mind, but then there are plenty of games these days that are as much about just having fun as they are about winning. And both activities boil down to the best verb of all, play. I was also thinking during your brief lore discussion this week that the world of MYST seems to have functioned as a metaphor for the game's creation in some ways. The ages of MYST, created by family members by writing in a runic language that brings them into living, breathing reality, must obviously have been a compelling notion to the Miller brothers who coded this strange world into existence on our clunky, compact, and gateway screens. Believe it or not, I do have a question buried in this overlong email. You touched briefly on the fact that MYST's mouse cursor does not give you the feedback you sometimes need in order to know what is happening when you click. I recall that the seventh guest had several different animated mouse cursors to tell you what, if anything, would happen when you clicked on a given spot. But MYST kept it simpler, sometimes causing you confusion. I'm curious whether you think there is any programming or design lineage between this click to see what happens design and the context-sensitive action button you often find in modern console games. I recall that Zelda Ocarina of Time was greatly praised on release for letting the A button change verbs depending on what object you were standing in front of, and something along those lines is near ubiquitous in games today. But MYST, in my recollection, was sometimes criticized for its overly simple interface. Can't wait for the next episode. Keep up the good work. Best, Walker. And then he has a link that I'll put in the show notes where he has a playable sequencer that they made for nonlinear music pattern generation, named for Rene Descartes. So I'll put that in the show notes for people who are interested in sort of interface design for hardware. That's a super interesting problem. Yeah. So 2 parts there.
Yeah.
One, I want to comment on the sort of knobs and dials sort of aspect, because as a gameplay programmer, that is something I actually think about a lot as well, because I can open up literally every bit of data that might inform how something behaves. But you have to be really careful about what are the most important things to expose to designers. And a lot of that then changes what they're able to do. And that's since Starfighter has been a thing that I have thought about anytime I've been involved in gameplay programming. It's like, what do I provide? What is the most important thing? What is sort of core that they can't really touch that much of? And what is something that they have full control over and they can do whatever they want with? And so that I definitely feel a kinship to music sequencer design, as it turns out.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty much what you do, especially when you're tools programming too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, modularity and data exposing data, it's all the same. Yeah, it's really interesting. I'll be honest, like that as a as a profession isn't one that it just it's such a unique, cool sounding profession.
Yeah.
It would never have dawned on me to even think about that. How those. I'm not an audio designer myself, so I'm sure our audio folks that we work with think about this all the time. But it's very fascinating. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I think that's a great exposing that to the audience is a great cool thing. Yeah, on the question, the correlation is interesting. I don't know. It's hard to give them so much of the benefit of the doubt that it was a very intentional decision to go as simple as they did, as opposed to Seventh Guest, which had more contextualization to it. And yeah, it's definitely become a mainstay for many games since. Yeah, an ocarina is a really good pool for contextual ladder climbing and jumping over a gap or whatever. I think that for me, though, my answer really comes down to what the goals of the game are, though, because there are going to be times when you don't want that to happen. It sounds like a good idea that you'd want to have as your default, right, to always be as accessible and contextual as those examples are saying. But there are times when you don't, right? And I guess there is a world where maybe the Miller brothers didn't want to overwhelm, and they wanted to obfuscate the clarity of that. Even though we were saying it'd be nice to have it, it could have been a goal, right? It could have been actually something that they chose to keep simple. Especially because they had one button, as Brett reminded me of, for the Mac, where you'd think that they would have wanted to have it be more contextual. So it seems like it must have been a choice, but it could have been a limitation too. So, long story short, I think there's times when you want to do it and there's times when you don't. It's not a default for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that they're also working with HyperCard, so there's probably some limitations there that I don't recall. I didn't use HyperCard a lot, sort of thing I was exposed to, but never did any serious development in. So there may be other things there as far as that goes. But where was I going? Yeah, I mean, I think that there might have been a sort of text adventure lineage in some of that stuff, of when you find a verb that you haven't, or a word in text adventure games where you haven't thought of like using this word in this other way. That's sort of a fun aha moment in a text adventure game. And I think that might be also what some of these sort of hidden areas might be meant to sort of emulate, is like, oh, I didn't think of clicking on that area in the screen or something like that. Or that little bit of visual information, which in the case of the Stoneship Age, I literally could not see, might have been visible on a different resolution for me. But might have been an aha moment of, oh, look at that. Isn't that clever? They snuck that in there or something like that.
Yeah.
So there is an aspect of where, to speak to your point, that maybe they were trying deliberately to obfuscate so that you would have the sense of these brothers as people who had secrets. Certainly in the Mechanical Age, where those rooms were kind of hidden behind and were quite disturbing, besides, especially Akinar's with the electrified cage. I mean, grim. We had somebody on the stream, I think it was Nolan, who said, oh yeah, this is the room that terrified me when I was a kid. And playing that, and like then of course clicking on that electrification icon as much as I could, just to get back at Nolan for his puns.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what I mean. I mean, if the cursors were contextualized, it would have been much easier for you to find, or for us to find, any of those secret rooms, and I don't remember.
They make it an eyeball or something like that. Like, oh, look here.
You're just gonna sweep across the screen and find them very easily, right? And so it depends on what goals they have. I don't remember in Seventh Guest, and I don't remember like how many secret sort of rooms there were or something like that, where it was more of a pixel hunt. But in the game design, I'll hypothetically make some stuff up that I can't corroborate because I don't remember in Seventh Guest, but you could have a different game design where a secret door would be a result of a combination of items versus finding the pixels that you need to click on. And so therefore they could still have a secret door, but not be pixel hunt. It would be more of combining things, which is maybe a little bit more the LucasArts, strategy.
Or for that matter, for like a survival horror game, like the Resident Evil games are basically that. Like you found a thing and you put it, you found this, gem and you put it in the socket, right? It's just like, oh, exactly. Well, there's clearly a socket there, that I got to find the thing for. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's a good question though, and it does unravel some interesting things for game design. So, all right, so let me go to the next one.
Yeah, the next and final one.
All right, subject is MYST and learning secrets in the pre-internet era from Corey Patomas. Is that?
I guess, yeah.
All right. Hey, Brett and Tim, love the show. I've been listening to the MYST episodes while catching up on the Pokemon episodes. And both got me thinking about how player bases learned and exchanged secrets before the internet really took a hold of the gaming culture. I know official strategy guides, gaming magazines, and early Usenet forums and game facts existed at the time, but it still really fascinated me how secrets, codes, and gaming urban legends spread across a pretty unconnected world. Things like the Minus world in Super Mario Brothers, the truck and missing NO in Pokemon Red and Blue. I feel like we talked about that, didn't we?
We did, yeah. Somebody might have written in, but yeah, there was like a weird glitch Pokemon or something.
Yeah. And everything about MYST reached me in my pre-internet coal town in Pennsylvania. Do you guys have insights or personal experiences on how this all worked? How did you figure anything out about MYST the first time? How do you think the super accessible present day has impacted secrets and myths about games? Last point, I do think Rockstar remains doing a great job on this with layers of mysteries for a super dedicated but small hardcore player bases like for GTA 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2. Love the show. Appreciate you taking your time to entertain and enlighten us. Corey. Yeah, this is a biggie that really kind of unwrap in a lot of detail. But I mean, I was kind of as an example for MYST specifically, I kind of I referenced it already earlier in that in the box they gave you a book that was clearly, in a way, the game design was designed around the concept that you needed to take notes. Yeah. And so what ended up happening a lot more so than today, like we still use the term kind of water cooler talk around games, but it's sort of sad to me that in a way that, at least when it comes to hints and puzzles and things like that, that's pretty much gone away, right? Because you're not going to be, everything's so accessible unless you really have a lot of discipline when you're at the water cooler and you're not giving away things, to each other and you're not on the internet. There's really no more water cooler talk unless you're talking about emergent gameplay of like what happened to you. But when it comes to puzzles, there's really not that anymore. But I mean, I don't know. Back in the day, it was just strategy guides and things like that were very specific, and so you had to seek them out. Other than that, it was word of mouth and water cooler talk where people were like passing around things they found or the rumor mill or what have you. Magazines were huge. In fact, because Mortal Kombat 11 just came out, people, always resurface those old stories of even like urban legend fake cheat codes and combos that in some cases were real and in some cases ended up being false because people would make stuff up. I'm mainly talking about the arcade versions, where you could unlock certain things, and in some cases they turned out to be false, but they kind of just got word of mouth around, and so people believe them. So I don't know, it was kind of an interesting time, but these days people design games around it. I think you made a good point about Rockstar, and I think I think good developers who have the time to go into that much depth into their game, they just design it into it. They lean into the fact that the internet is the internet, right? And that they put the obfuscation within the game in different ways, sometimes in emergent ways, or sometimes in ways where they actually want you to talk about it and to reveal things to each other. And it's about experiencing it more than it is about what the answer is. But anyway, what do you think on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. It's funny, we talking about books a lot this time. There's a book by Richard Powers. I had to think. I was actually looking it up because I think it was this book called Plowing the Dark. It came out in 2000, and it's a weird, complicated story about sort of virtual reality of the time. These sort of full screen projector rooms that you could build with advanced computers at the time. Mostly SGI machines, as it turns out, which were things I worked on in grad school, and a hostage in, I don't know, the Middle East somewhere. I don't remember all the details, but I do remember there's a section in the book where one of the main characters is on the internet late at night in some sort of chat room, and somebody starts typing in the descriptions of different rooms in Colossal Cave Adventure. And of course, this stuck with me because it is my first game. And they are together sort of solving and sort of role-playing being the game for each other in this conversation. So somebody will say, oh, you're east of this house, this white house, or you're at the mailbox or whatever. Or you're in a maze of twisty little passages all alike, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that happens over the course of the evening is, as the game gets deeper into the guts of the game, the very late part of the game, fewer and fewer people are able to chime in on what's going on because they didn't get that far.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it was like playing games, in the 80s, before we had all this connectivity. That was my experience of Colossal Cave Adventure, was that's not a game I was able to finish when I was a kid, for multiple reasons. One of them was that it was on a dumb terminal that my dad would bring home some weekends, and we would play for hours, but we wouldn't finish it. We'd make maps, we'd get further, but we never finished it together. It was only when I played Zork later that I actually was able to finish basically that game. It's not exactly the same, but there's a lot of similarities. And then later, much, much later, I played it once I was in the industry, when you could just play it on a web page. And I played it all the way through just to have the experience. But I think before the internet era, it depended where you were, and just, I don't know, how cussed you were, just how stubborn you were that you were going to figure out this thing, and how much you could fit that into your life. I mean, I think that's still to a degree true for sort of games that are more physically difficult and demanding, like the Dark Souls series, or a Ninja Gaiden Black or something like that. I think there are still games where that happens. They're just not games that you have to figure out, puzzle out. They're games that you have to physically master. And I think that there's that we have lost a thing there. But at the same time, I think maybe we've gained a thing, in that we can all experience a thing together to a degree we couldn't before.
That's what I was going to say, that I think I did a bad job trying to describe earlier, and your points help me kind of see it a little bit more clearly with some tangible examples. One really significant example that will, I think, in the future be seen, and is still a little bit seen now already as a bit of a trailblazer, is a game called oh my god, the name is just escaping me. That EA game, Majestic.
Majestic,
Um,
yeah, Majestic.
and so the reason I bring up Majestic is sort of the first AAA quote unquote ARG or alternate reality game, and then a modern example of this sort of concept of working using the internet to work together to solve something in a community based way. um, Destiny's actually doing quite a bit of this with some of their raids and some of their
Mm-hmm.
sort of like unlocking of content, and they're not the first ones to do it for sure, but I just use them because they're doing it literally right now. And so what it's causing, the community to do is to work together to solve problems and solve these puzzles. And they're designing, my point that I was trying to make earlier is that they're trying to design around that, right? So that everyone sort of needs to work together, and you can design around that and make it so difficult that one person can't do it that easily. And so you actually band together. So that's kind of a cool opportunity that's been created from the ARG mentality, in my opinion. And so,
Yeah. I mean, it's similar to one of your games, MGS 5 or V, where in order in the multiplayer to unlock some things, nuclear stuff, I don't know. I don't remember because
I don't remember exactly.
But there was a whole thing, right? Where
once
everybody got to a certain level of power or something was going to unlock a thing. And
you had to, I think it was, you had to disarm a certain number of nuclear warheads.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there had to be collective action to do that. And then the other game I thought of that's kind of in a similar vein was Noby Noby Boy.
Yeah.
Where it was, they were keeping track of literally how far the Noby Noby Boys collectively had stretched. Like how, and that was a game where you basically were putting on bits. You're extending the length of these creatures in the game, and the Noby Nobys, I guess, not a game I played, but they were keeping track of that all on the server, and they were giving bonuses to the community when they reached certain milestones, like, oh, we've stretched all the way to Jupiter, and things like that. So they were using our solar system as a metric for, as for the distance that the Noby Noby Boys had stretched, collectively, in all of the games. And as they reached different lengths, they would do stuff. So there's just been this sort of replacement of the difficulty that was kind of artificial in these early games, and again, were fun when you got past it, you figure something out. I mean, there's something there. It's not a thing that we should abandon. It's just practically difficult when there's the internet to do. So I think developers have definitely turned to other sorts of challenges where collective action, since we're going to do it anyway, is required to overcome challenges that they've put in front of us. And that's pretty interesting. It's a I mean, I guess that's a way that it has impacted this stuff. Yeah. I mean, there's also the weird Bigfoot myth in GTA 3, maybe? I can't remember if it's like the
no, it was Red Dead 1, I think. Red Dead Redemption 1.
That had Bigfoot? I thought it was Grand Theft Auto 3 San Andreas.
Oh, did it? Okay, well, there literally was one in...
Right. So there was reportedly one in GTA 3 San Andreas, I think, or GTA San Andreas, or whatever. And I think that's where that started.
Oh,
and maybe they put it in.
Right.
But it was like, who knows? Like, I don't think anybody actually still knows, or it's ever been reported whether that was a thing.
Yeah, I'm sure someone will write in.
Yeah, I'd love to know. Yeah, I mean, if you do know, if you actually know. I mean, I've read stuff about people hunting it, but I never actually saw a definitive answer. And certainly I don't think, Rockstar is a famously closed-mouthed sort of studio, so I don't think they've ever talked about it.
Yeah.
But,
well, Red Dead 2, Red Dead Redemption 2 has a bunch of definitely hidden and, hard to find little Easter eggs and stuff that people uncover, right? I think that's what he's referring to with the small hardcore player base who's really going and scouring every little square inch of that thing, and probably still uncovering stuff because they really devoted themselves to it. And you mentioned, I mean, it's a drinking game at this point of how many times we mentioned Dark Souls, but I think that there's that age old debate about why is that game so opaque, and why do they not have more tooltips, and why is it not more accessible, et cetera, et cetera. And, who knows exactly their motivations ended up being what they were, but what it did create is a lot of questions for people when they play the game, and then they have to players basically crowdsource your way through it to figure out what this means, what that means, right? And so it kind of puts some of the onus into the hands of the community, which then thus engages and galvanizes the community around a thing because they're doing it all together and finding out what this sword does, or that whatever, what that object does or that enemy does, and then it just becomes sort of the way that the difficulty is based around it. But the other notion that I'll throw in, and then I'll shut up about it. The other thing that I feel like has happened, at least for me personally, is the modern era has brought in a new skill or discipline about how to play games and kind of go radio silent on stuff. You basically need to now have a discipline to, how am I going to play this game? Especially if it's a linear single player game that does have puzzles or some sort of things that would be gates that would be easily skipped if I just go to the internet. I now have to have a new discipline type to not do that. Where before it wasn't a choice, And so I definitely have changed the way that I play certain games because of that, because I might say to myself, I'm definitely not going to cheat on this one, and it changes the way that I play it. I just didn't have to do that before.
Yeah, no, that's true. And it's something that Jonathan Blow in particular with The Witness and before has leaned into and said, look, you should play these games that way. You should play these games and have the experience of figuring it out for yourself. That's what these games are about.
Yeah.
Which, I'm not sure I 100% agree with that, but I understand the perspective, and it's sort of a way to say, I mean, it's sort of akin to the accessibility discussion we had a couple episodes ago about Dark Souls with respect, or maybe a few, actually it was about Sekiro, I guess, with respect to accessibility and, everybody being able to play a game, and how they've chosen not to do that. That they have chosen to make it a climb to get over. I mean, it all kind of ties in together, but there is a particular feeling of overcoming those things, whether it's a challenge, a physical challenge, or in the case of these older games, often a mental challenge more than a physical challenge. The frame rate wasn't there to be a physical challenge. I mean, things are lost, things are gained. It's just kind of the way of the world, I guess. All right. Well, I guess we're not entirely done with MYST. We have the potential for a guest. We're working on that. But we also want to take a look at 2016's Abduction, which is also from Cyan, which I think is available on a couple of consoles and PC. So if we don't get a guest for next week, we'll probably play 2 or 3 hours of that a piece, and discuss it here, and how it ties into the lineage, what we see there, or we'll have the guest. We'll see, and we'll turn to Abduction the week after. We'll see how it goes. He did confirm. I see that you are not on the mail though, so he just replied to me for some reason. So I think we're good. I think we're confirmed for. Okay, good. Yeah, for next week. Excellent. Well, then we'll play Abduction the week following. So unless something changes or he changes his mind, we're going to have Robin Miller on. So terrific. Very exciting. Cyrus himself. Yep. And he's near you, so he'll be imprisoning you in a book. Right. I'll need to hide from him as we're doing. So that's going to be exciting. We'll hopefully we can get into some of the questions that we have about things, but
Yeah, so that's exciting. And then we'll play what's it called? Abduction.
Observation is a new game that just came out this week.
That's exactly. That's hearing about.
We're running out of words apparently.
Right.
They get confusing.
Cool.
Okay.
All
right. Well, you of course can shoot us email at devgameclub@gmail.com, as those folks did. Thank you so much. Or you can find us on the web at devgameclub.com. You, of course, can find the podcast Twitter feed at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
I am occasionally tweeting these days, but mostly you can find me weeknights at twitch.tv/Brett Duville playing whatever I'm playing at the moment. Currently, Lightning Returns, the third game in the Final Fantasy XIII series. Or on the weekends, you can find me playing whatever we're playing on the cast. Usually I play both days, and if I run out of stuff to do with the game we're playing, I go back to whatever I'm playing weeknights. So that's where you can find me. Thanks so much. Have fun playing games this week, and good night.
Good night.